Two residents of Flowers House in Forest Keys.
Yes, thank you. So what we'll do is we'll move forward the item 7. We'll take that up.
And we also have Janet Higgins, who is another resident of Flowers House. Yes. For the record.
Right, so any apologies for absence. Chair, no apologies. Any declarations of interest from councillors? That's what
Just on pecuniary interest, item 7.3, this is a member of Park.
Just for clarification, Chair, I suspect we've passed the point when it's relevant for Councillor Sinclair that there are also members of St Albans District Council in relation to Rockford Park, because I don't think that the town clerk confirmed anything here that would be in any way contentious vis-a-vis the District Council declaration.
Yeah, Chair, I don't think there's anything in relation to that item that requires a council declaration.
Chairman's report on urgent items. I don't have any. Any other questions in accordance with Standing Order 22? Minutes. Including the minutes of the Community Services Committee meeting held on the 12th of January 2022, circulated. Can I sign those as an accurate record? Okay, so we will now take item 7.5. One argument coming up is suspend standing orders to allow.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct, Chair. Discretion, you can suspend standing orders if the public wishes to speak for 3 minutes.
Okay, so Mr. Head, would you like to speak to
Perhaps you would like to introduce the item first to describe what the proposal is, and just so that everyone is familiar with the context in which I'm.
Orders of receipt papers.
Can I introduce my neighbour Paul, who lives in Foresters Green, so my wife Janet, Ken, who also lives in Foresters Green, and Carol are unable to be here. They're both very elderly. Like the rest of us, regularly have their access to their homes completely by the markets. The paper that you have received today, I only became aware of this afternoon by accessing the website due to the fact I had been in discussion with Paul Cousins since November, when I had a meeting with Paul and on the site where I suggested a number of solutions to access to car. It's therefore particularly disappointing papers in front of you tonight, particularly in relation to what is called option 1, which is the option that will obstruct access to our home. Doesn't reference the fact that we suffered this imposition for 14 years. But not only have the farmers' markets been operated once a month during that period, but now the council is sponsoring so-called sustainability markets that will blight our access for a further 6 weekends. It has also promoted a food market and various Christmas events, which will mean that up to 20 events a year will restrict our access. Now, that might be fine if you actually instructed your executive to position stalls and the barriers in such a way as to give us access to our homes. But you don't do that, and you repeatedly have not done that since September. If you look at your appendix B, this is the current arrangement. If you look at the area of access,
You're referring to page 77.
I don't know, it's 7.5B. I don't have a number of that. But it's the part of the current arrangements. Noticeably, the plan does not show any arrangements for resident access. And that's because residents' access has been treated as an inconvenience and ignored systematically by the officers on the ground. So that, as you also see on the photograph, which I sent you, which I would like to go into the minutes, please, where there is the sign that stipulates that residents are to be given access, there are stalls on either side of the road abutting the highway and preventing our access to our homes. Now, we had a long-standing protocol whereby the barriers would be placed back on the entrance to the road to allow cars to safely come in, and the stalls would not be placed in such a way as to prevent access. If you look at the arrangements on October 2021, you can see that plastic boxes and market stalls are almost completely blocking the road. When I tried to access our home in February, I had to park up my car. There was no safe place to park the car near the entrance to the market. I went to ask for access. I was laughed at by the staller holders who knew nothing about it. They told me to go and look for the market officer, which I did for the next 10 minutes or so, who was nowhere in attendance. You are in so doing in breach of the long-standing orders, road closure orders, and I today made a request to Hertfordshire County Council that those orders should be reviewed, and unless you are able to behave yourselves, I will contend that they should be revoked. Regarding the position that pertained during the COVID period, the council was clearly able to hold markets in alternative locations. It did so successfully in the Rothamsted car park, where there is generous space, not only for the stalls currently in the market, but for additional stalls, if you're worried about the finances of the thing. Because the only cost that you seem to be counting is the financial cost of the council, and certainly not the cost for your residents or to my elderly and disabled parents or other residents who use that access. You have also successfully held markets on the common, and contrary to the assurances of Anita Pack back in the 2007, when the market was first established, you did not need to cement over the common to do so. You can successfully run markets on the common. Well, but the corner of Bowers Bray for many years until the residents actually, I think Paul did this actually. He got his spade out and actually shoveled out one of the drains, which and actually if you see, well, you can't see it on this picture, but one of the stalls would have been sitting in an enormous puddle on Bowers Bray had it not been for civic mindedness. But the point about the alternative venues is that the rationale for obtaining the highway orders, and this is a public highway which we are entitled to use along with any other road user, was that there was no alternative site for the market. And Anita Pack cited the prohibitive cost and the ridiculous proposition of paving the common at the time in justification of that position. That's clearly been shown to be bunkum. And it's high time that the council either moves it to a viable alternative location that it's clearly been able to use over the last 2 years, or it operates in such a way that it arranges stalls so as to give residents access. But what it shouldn't be doing is now increasing the frequency of the markets beyond the 12 markets that the council originally undertook to site there. to the 18 to 20 that is now. It's just pushing and pushing at the borders. I respectfully submit that you either move the market or you put in place effective arrangements for our access, and that certainly you hold no more than one market a month in that site.
Okay, you finished?
You have
Did any of you
Yes.
to say anything?
you want to say something?
I just want to say, many people on Sundays don't work. My husband here happens to work on Sundays and he needs this access. He needs to use his car on Sundays as he sings in the Abbey, in St. Albans Abbey, and takes the car every Sunday twice. And this is quite an inconvenience. And he's been obediently doing and moving the car every Saturday night, which is inconvenient in itself because we are obstructed until 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Sundays. So that should be taken into consideration as well. This drive is used, and also our elderly parents, we try not to invite them around the weekends when the market is taking place, because we just have to accommodate them as well, the access. And also about Ken is so frail. He's over 90. Is he 93 now? And his family comes regularly as well to see him, and just to be more considerate about us as well. I appreciate the facts.
Right, well now, I think the plan was Clark before John takes your sons. Okay, just for people's information. So some may remember that. Okay, right, Clark, you want to give a sort of summary of.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Chair. So, as part of my introduction, I was going to give some context that Mr. Head has already given, so I won't try to. Well, I'll try to avoid duplicating things. There are a few key points I just wanted to make in relation to the report you've got in front of you, but also just off the back of the email that you sent this afternoon by Mr. Head and the residents. So, the report explores the options for the future location of the farmers market. And the reason why it's been developed by officers is following engagement with residents late last year with myself and the town mayor. And one of the things we committed to do at that time is to bring forward to the committee a report with various options to explore the future location. And so that's what this is this evening.
I just note that since that time, you've taken no steps whatsoever to implement practical measures to permit our access, and indeed they've been impeded.
Mr. Head, no disrespect, but you had to say.
I wish to note that our access has been impeded repeatedly since that meeting.
Yeah, I think we got that.
Can make it clear as one of the ward councillors, from Mr. Head and others. This is clearly a very serious issue for the residents. It is quite difficult for someone to say everything is the same 3 minutes. Okay, you give some latitude there. I appreciate we can't have what might seem interruptions, but perhaps if we at least allow Mr. Head or the others to speak when we've had our discussion, as it were, and before a final decision, then that perhaps would be helpful.
Yeah, we'll do that. But we don't want, constant commentary. In fact, people will give you the opportunity to speak at the end of we finished on this.
Thank you, Chair. So I think, as you heard, there are what I would describe as a primary issue that residents have in terms of the location of the farmers market, and that the preference that it's not delivered in that location itself and it's relocated to somebody else, somewhere else, I should say, so that it doesn't create the access restrictions that it currently does have. But there are also 2 kind of secondary issues. One is to do with the volume of the wider markets, and secondly, to do with how the current market is operated under its current way of doing things. I do have to point out to committee that given the correspondence that we received earlier and notification that there's been a referral to the Highways Authority, that complaint may require legal advice for the council. And so for that reason, I'm not able to comment any more on the operational points in public this evening, because that would not be wise for the council to do that if it needs to seek legal advice. So just advise that now. If you wanted to talk in detail about the operational side of things and get views on that, you would need to be in 2% business because of that legal side of things and the risk associated. However, the two other points I think can certainly be addressed. The report you've got in front of you does offer alternative locations. And there is one additional recommendation that officers would like to make that isn't in your pack, and that does pick up on the point around wider markets. So there is the opportunity for the committee this evening to decide that the sustainability markets, which ordinarily wouldn't have, they're a fairly new addition, we could no longer deliver them on the current site and deliver them in a different location within the town. They are a smaller market, however, they use the same site because it's a slightly different style, so it's bring your own gazebo rather than farm market stalls. So that could be something the committee decides this evening to agree to stop the sustainability markets in that location, which I think would straight away lower the volume of markets that we've got going in. So that is something as officers we would recommend you consider this evening. Chair, I do have some other context that I was going to raise in terms of the timeline, but I think the residents here have actually presented that in itself. So there's nothing further for me to add at this particular time.
Right. So let's before we discuss, let's just get through facts. So the road traffic order that we get, what's exactly on its term?
So essentially, Chair, in order to deliver the market in its current location, and option one in the pack is the current location, although the two blue squares that you see in that pack they seem to show that it's closed off. Actually, it's not meant to show that. So that's the current setup of the market. So in order to deliver that current setup, we have to have a road closure order, which we have in place. In order to deliver the road closure order, we need to do that in a legal manner, which means we have to block off access points, which is the reason why we have barriers in the key locations. They have to go in key times in order to limit the ability for cars to be parked there overnight and to be on the market site on the day of the market itself. So the measures that we have to put in place at the moment are those that deliver the road closure order. So the only way in which we wouldn't have to have a road closure there is to have no stalls in that part of town upwards. If we removed some stalls, but we were still expecting people to access market stalls further up, we would have to have a road closure order, and we would have to put in place the measures that we have already in terms of barriers, signage.
Can I add a matter of fact?
Yes.
For many years, until 2020, the market was operated in such a way that barriers were put back from the high street. There was access for cars. All of the trade had access in this manner. It is not true that the current siting of barriers and stalls is the same as in previous years. They have changed materially, and they have been implemented in such a way that our access is now routinely obstructed. It has changed.
You know, roughly from when?
Since there was a period of 2 years when the council held the market elsewhere, but from September 2021, the first we knew was when the road was blocked off for 3 consecutive days for a food festival and a so-called sustainability market, of which we hadn't been advised at all. There was a public stage thrown up over our access. There were multiple tables and chairs. We simply couldn't access our homes at all over 3 days, and that was in express breach of assurances given that closure would be for no more than 24 hours, 3 days.
Thanks. So may I just ask a question? So before the COVID lockdowns and those changes on High Street, were you able to access your house by car in farmers markets?
We were
People to drive in.
usually able
On
to drive in.
Saturdays,
I mean,
yes, to move the barriers.
And then on Sundays you weren't?
yes, we were.
You were still?
We were able to. And we had a protocol whereby we could do that. And indeed, we still have that right to do that during the markets. The problem is that the market was completely unsupervised in February, and the stalls were positioned in such a way that you were breaching the order. And that's the nub of the complaint to Hertfordshire County Council around.
Well, that's why I asked all the terms of the order.
Yeah.
So,
But the terms of the order are not such that they prevent arrangements, absolutely arrangements for allowing resident access, because for most of the 14 years in which they've been in place, we have been able to access during the period of farmers' markets.
that's the count.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question for Carl. In terms of the options, I mean, I think we've got a fairly wide range of potential options here. Is there not an option we could take that would work? And I'm asking this purely because I don't know the answer rather than suggesting it's an option. Where you remove these stalls here and put them somewhere else and had access through that way. Is that a possibility that we could do within existing structures, or would it be because the roads?
Is that one way?
I think, but yeah, I'm
It's
sure.
one way.
But we have access against the one-way
One-
system
Yeah.
during the time of farmers' markets.
Okay.
And yes, there is an area which the council was considering in 2012 in Thompson's Close, when we received a promise from them and Clark that the stalls in this area here would be moved into this area here. When I asked for that to be done recently, I was told that there was too much of a slope in Thompson's Close. The slope is probably about 40 centimetres over 20 metres, 20, 30 metres. It's not Mont Blanc. You could comfortably situate these stalls here into this area here in Thompson's Close. And I made that point to Carl when we had our meeting, but it hadn't made its way into these papers.
Thank you, Chair. You just say, I think if that is an option that would sort of be a less of a change than some of the other options, I think it would be worth considering that this evening as well.
Chair, can I just clarify, just on that, so just in the understanding, you would still require a road closure order, so you would still have to have the access barriers and anything else in that place. It would widen that section, just to be clear, you would still require a road closure order.
It's a road closure order that requires access. Those are the terms of the current order, the order that you're breaching at the moment. So nothing changes. You could use the same road closure order. I mean, you need one in Thompson's Close, but that is not an area of vehicular access. It's totally pedestrianised.
Such good.
I just would like some clarity on something, just on timelines here, because there's a suggestion that it's the volume and the access since September that has become an issue. What I'm confused by is how there's clearly a history before that, where these things, well, were obviously a problem then. I'm just wondering how we're kind of back to having an issue where we stand now. Does that make sense? So I think the suggestion is that if we reduce the market numbers back to 12, and that the access, which is supposed to be for the order, was in place, that things would be okay. Yet we've had problems prior to when you said this all started in September 21. So I'm just.
There have been periods over the last 14 years when I have had to write to the council, and usually the council has been quite amenable, where I have said that the access has been obstructed, and we have agreed protocols for the siting of stalls and the siting of barriers, whereby we have been able to access our properties, and we have accessed our properties. We've always accessed our properties. As it says on the roadside, it says market days, except for access to Bowers House, Stroke Yard. That's on the site. So that's your duty in holding these markets on what is a public highway, which any of us can use, but in particular the people who access their homes need to use it. You don't need to use it to sell ostrich burgers from Lincolnshire.
Thank you, Chair. I've been one of the more councillors for question. I do feel disadvantaged in that it's only been a councillor for 3 years, but I'm coming to this problem new personally. Of course, there wasn't anything in the paperwork to suggest the background to this protracted affair. And therefore, I don't feel comfortable making a long-term decision this evening if the proposition is we suggest we relocate the market, and given there's a long tail of getting the new orders of 18 months, I'd be much rather personally for us to be making that decision here and now when we've not had enough preparation time. However, if there is a way forward along the lines of what's just been suggested, in other words, if particular areas would facilitate easier access, can be achieved by moving a few stalls, and if that can be done sooner rather than later, then that clearly ought to be done. And maybe that is a long-term solution as well, because personally I think this is the best location in the town, subject to it not causing inconvenience to the public and residents. The final point I'd say is, given that the deal was 12 Sundays a year, then if that's increased by 10 budget to 6 and a few more, then if there's now the opportunity to put those somewhere else, long term or medium term, then it would be right not to be making the existing problem worse until we've solved the existing problem. If that makes sense.
Yes, I think there's one possibility. We could, if you can go against the one-way system, most correct to get access into boundaries we we could theoretically put a barrier across as before Palace, and then look to move these stores, which are at the top end, down much further down towards the Methodist Church. And we have to. The reason I'm suggesting this is, first of all, there's a little car park to the right of the Methodist Church as you look at it, but you can only get about 4 cars in there. So if you put a barrier on the other side of the Methodist Church,
Yes, it's
you could basically, I would have thought, move. We would have to do a consultation. But you could move most of the stalls which are in Bathurst Parade down there. And then if you could go against the one-way system in Bathurst Parade, you could get your access to Bathurst Yard that way. So I think that's probably something that's worth looking into.
On behalf of the Methodists, I know that when the plans were originally made for the market, Harvard and Town Council spent hundreds of thousands on paving the High Street, including in that area all the way down from the corner of the Station Road right up to outside the Cross Keys. It did not pave the current area because it never intended to hold a market in the current area. But the Methodists were concerned with the original proposal for the market because it obstructed their Sunday worship. So,
well, that's why.
Whether you could possibly have a sort of reverse the one-way area to the Methodist car park and gain, what would that be? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe seven stores in that area. If you require the Methodists to then go against the.
Well, most of the people, I mean, I'm parked in that car park myself. Various events. And most people going to the Methodist Church go park in the rear, public area, go through. I think there is a way through. Okay. I think Councillor Campbell, sorry.
Thank you, just on road closures and lengths of time and things like this. So I think we can put long term and short term potentially about different solutions. In the short term, and this is probably a health and safety question more than anything else, is there a way that you could move those stores across the Church Green without actually closing any roads? on that side. You had them on the green facing on the same.
That's the solution shown in appendix D.
Yeah, sorry. So that solution shows the stalls being on Church Green, I think. I'm looking at the appendix. Yeah, so I mean on this side as well as on this side. So in order to make sure you had enough so that you face onto the high street. Is that a possibility without actually doing any road projects?
Yes, in theory, depending on the number of stalls, because the greater the number of stalls, the higher the expected footfall you have on the pavement, then determine whether you need to close the road and health and safety. But if you had a small amount, starting on the grass, then that could work. Just have the issue of starting on the grass and looking at the damage that could cause. But theoretically, if it was a small number, you would have to close the road. We'd have to seek advice.
The stalls themselves are not on the grass, that they would be on the pavement, as happens at the moment on occasion. But that's the
So, Chair, I think Councillor Cowley is not talking about the option in the paper, he's talking about a hybrid of that, so having a small number of those stalls on the grass on Church Green to create space in the area you're talking about.
I'm doing what I normally do and being inconvenient by suggesting options that are not ready. Let's go.
Chair, sorry if I mean, with your particular suggestion of in the ones from Flowers Parade, what is so called, down towards the church and police. The other big problem with this church is in front of Sainsbury's, and that's a favourite spot for people for pickups, family member comes and picks up the person who's from shopping, or for the elderly who call a taxi. That would be further inconvenience, that would inconvenience quite a number of people.
Could I suggest a hybrid of appendix B and appendix B? If you look at appendix B and the stall is situated at the point of access, there are, including the blue one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. If you then look at appendix D and the stalls set out simply on the road, on the crossing on Church Green, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. 13 stalls situated on the road that do not impede residential access. You could have a break, a small break in the market between the area opposite Thompson's Close, which is between 37 and 35 on that. You would then resume the market along Bowers Parade, number 1, to the end, and you would move the stalls that are currently in front of Godfrey's Fish Shop and the pub the Cross Keys. You could move those 10 or so stalls into the area on Church Green that can accommodate 12 or 13, and you have a little spare capacity for a few more stalls. I can set out that proposal in writing if that would be helpful.
Yeah, I think we got that.
Just hypothetically, if that is viable, but the town clerk advise how quickly that could be implemented. Filling which is a quick fix which achieves something similar, which could be implemented while you're waiting your traffic order. That's required.
What's Carl's thinking about that?
Yeah, it's another suggestion as we're sort of entering spring, she said hopefully after today's body weather. Whether we could temporarily move to the common if we can't find another sort of a backup plan to. It's just a suggestion.
I think the difficulty is water on ground.
Yeah, I was hoping it was going to be dry.
Damage the surface caused.
Yeah.
The particular area with the market is much less prone to be waterlogged because it used to be a highway itself.
It's the top.
And it's quite a dry, well elevated section that doesn't get waterlogged.
It would still be soft ground.
It had been successfully used.
It's to be later in the year. So I think from about May, June, that's fine.
Summer.
But like March is still good.
Yeah, Chair, so if I understand that right, so relocating the stalls that are just by the access point on Bowers Parade and moving them to the grassed area on Church Green.
And down towards the entrance to Bowes Yard.
So if they were on the grassed area, then we would just need to seek a view as to whether there would need to be any road closing along Church Green because of the potential number of people walking up the footway. We would be blocking the highway, i.e. the path, so we need to seek a view on that. So in answer to your timescale question, that would depend on how quickly highways give us a response as to what they would require us to do. If they say that needs a road closure to happen here, then we go back to the timescales that we quoted in the report. If they say that they haven't got any issue with it and the town council wishes to put those stalls temporarily on the grass on Church Green, then we would look to implement that as soon as possible. We would need to consult with traders to understand who would be happy to go over there and deal with the engagement for back of that. So we would need some legal time. So yeah. But just for that, Chair, so in that hybrid model, the road closure would still be needed down Bowers Parade. So you'd still have to go through the same access barrier that we do now.
Why wouldn't the road on Church Green be suitable? Because it has regularly been used in the past by stalls, and it doesn't impede any residential access, and there is complete access around Church Green if you block up that crossing, because there's a roundabout that can go past Marks and Spencer's and down to Wakefield and up to the avenues. You don't need that road.
Yeah, but we can't speculate. Have to get permission from highways.
Yeah, so I wasn't suggesting that might not be suitable. What I was suggesting is we would need to check with highways as to whether they would need us to have a road closure if the stalls were on the grass. Clearly, if we were suggesting they were on that highway, then we would have to have a road closure. And we would be leaving period for that.
I think perhaps what we're working towards is a short-term solution, which would be the on Church Green, the stalls on grass. And the longer-term solution, because traffic goes there, but would it take time that those stores would move to the diagonal road across Church Green.
Yeah, council possible to draw the preempt to what I was about to say.
I just point out then that you're reducing significantly the car parking for Nick's Church.
We did have handicars parked there.
On that.
Yeah, it's
Councillor.
Yeah, thinking about the sort of short-term solution, I mean, moving them onto the Church Green, and if I'm understanding Carl right, it wouldn't be, we have to sort of get agreement from the traders who are there to move it there. So I'm not sure how, it's not something we could do next month, is it? So it's not a short-term solution. It's fine in principle. I mean, I would be concerned about closing that section of I mean, there's also, I'd be quite interested to hear what strength it'd be by moving on to the Church Green, because then you kind of, in effect, you could almost have two markets, or where you've got up here, and then how much footfall will this area have, because you have to cross the road, which is a concern. But if the traders are happy to do it, then it's fine. But, it's not a short-term solution, just with we're clear with the residents that that's not happening next month.
You are under an obligation to provide us access every single month. That isn't an option. Just to be clear, you are obliged to comply with the current order to give us access.
Okay. Yeah, just very briefly on the short term, because I'm aware that that's the phrasing I brought in. I mean, sort of in terms of if it takes 18 months to get a road closure order, I obviously accept it isn't necessarily something we can do next month, but it's a shorter term solution than potentially a road closure. Just to be clear clear on the phrasing. I was trying.
Well, I think
Sorry, Chair, I'm not sure we've decided on other markets that this is going to be anything other than the farmers market.
I think, I mean, what we can do immediately is to, as proposed here, is to discontinue the sustainability market application. That's the something.
Yes, Chair, yeah, so essentially find a new location for the sustainability market that doesn't require any, that doesn't have any access restrictions on the properties that we're talking about. Yeah, so in the main market.
We can agree that.
How often is sustainable?
Just every other month.
Every other month.
Yeah.
What day?
On Sunday.
On a Sunday, so yeah. Okay. Yeah. Is it on now? Let's sit. Sunday.
Yeah, so it's,
Normally-
this weekend,
Yeah.
too much.
Okay.
Just, so that would just be the sustainability market, my recommendation on that. There are other events that we hold, the Food and Drink Festival, which is planned for 2022, and Christmas Carnival, of course, that will have access, will mean access restrictions in that particular area. So this is just the farmers market and the sustainability market we're considering this.
So for clarity, the Christmas festival, which on the lines, that would continue in its original location.
Yes.
And our access is absolutely blocked on those occasions. But
Well, that's an annual thing.
we're comfortable, happy to accommodate a Christmas market once a year. We did that since we arrived in 1999. What we're not comfortable in doing is foregoing our access on 20 occasions during. And the
Yeah,
definitely
you made that point at length. We got it. Okay, so are we in favour then of moving the sustainability market to a different location after this Sunday? Yes. So everybody in favour of that?
That's straightforward.
Okay, right. So that reduces your number by 12. Straight to six. I think it's alternate answers. Okay. What can we do about policing the access until we can find another solution?
So, Chair, to give you an answer to that, you're going to have to move into exempt business because of the complaint side of things. And just a wider point, there's been lots said about access, and I'm slightly restricted in giving you my advice on that because we're in the public at the moment, which is slightly frustrating for me because I feel like I can't guide you as I normally would. But to answer that sort of question, you need to move into exempt business, and for me and Phil to give our opinion and advice on that complaint.
Okay. So, what is the best thing to do? We can move into exempt business, which means it's private session, so we would have to leave. And we'll debate the operational issues to see what we can do. That's as a result of you putting in the complaint to the highways department, which means that we may have to get legal advice in our position. That's what
We've all seen the photograph, and you've seen the evidence I put forward. The council is not complying with the current order. And you do need to get legal advice on that, but be assured that you are not complying with the way you are breaking things. And there's photographic evidence. So by all means, have your private discussion and take your legal advice. But I'm quite certain that you are in breach of those orders, and I will contend that if you do not reinstate the access.
Well, I think that is probably our best thing to do to vote and move into exempt business so we can discuss the short-term operational issues. Everybody agree?
Yeah, so Chair, just on that, so what you're voting on is to essentially park this item now to move into exempt business later on the agenda to pick the item up later rather than going exempt now and then coming back into public.
Is it not possible to do with it?
We can go in and out, but it's
I'm just sort of thinking on behalf of the Ward Council for residents, and that they would like to know what's happening. They're running their business, and we can allow them back in. They want to see what's happening.
In terms of understanding the decision that the committee is taking.
Yeah.
If the committee wishes to, you want to move into exempt now.
I'd be interested to understand what more there's to discuss after the access point. I mean, if there's more that council wants to say on that, that's fine. But, you know, that discussion afterwards, there's a risk that could become a debate on access, and after having delegalised, we could then be mentioning things that perhaps we best not.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think that's right. So I think what we'll do is we'll go into exempt business at the end. We'll close the discussion on this now. We'll deal with the other items on our agenda. Then we'll go into exempt business, discuss operational issues, and what we can do in the short term.
Yeah. And if it helps on the point of Councillor Butterworth, straight after the meeting, I'm happy to email to the residents the resolution that's taken, so they have got the outcome straight away this evening, if that helps.
So thank you, the Chair and Town Clerk. Are we clear exactly what we have decided now?
Well, we decided to move the sustainability model, consider the options.
The farmers market.
Yeah, for the farmers market, in particular what we can do in the short term. Everybody okay? Yeah. All right, thank you.
Okay, this is my kids.
One last.
Yes,
That the council should not operate it with a mindset whereby it does not consult with residents who are most closely impacted by these decisions, as it did do with the sustainability market and the food festival and the recent blight on our access. You know, we are here to be spoken to. We're happy to work with you to find a solution, but we do not expect to be treated with contempt and ignored. And the circumstances of this meeting were pretty reprehensible, because it was only by accident that I found out about it. And that is a shame on the council operation. But reflect on that in your culture, because it's poor culture.
Can I just say one thing? At the moment, the vegetable market is present not just the Pizza Express, and I don't know, does that mean some road closure? Or could, for example, those stores can be moved, which are mostly vegetables and fruits, which are on that access, could they be perhaps moved next to Pizza Express? I don't know, it's just a thought.
yeah, it's a long way away from the existing market.
It's still High Street though. That's fine. But just thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for your time. Chair, I know, I'm sure we can go into the six. It missed it. It's still cool. Just wait for it.
Check this out. Just check we are recording, just in case.
So Councillor Upworth's absence will be noted on the tape.
Are we waiting or?
Well, just waiting. As a courtesy. Just kidding.
It's going to get late, is what I'm saying. I have six.
Well, councillors don't normally leave.
I can't imagine what we've discussed, but I think it's in the interest of the council.
We should continue.
I think we should continue.
Yeah.
I don't know what, I can't imagine what we've discussed.
I have 6 children at home,
This is
after, so I'm kind of juggling.
This is in a personal negotiation.
No.
I've got an issue. Okay, that's. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Right, item 6, minutes of other meetings referred to the Community Services Committee. Just receiving all of those, does anybody have any comments on these or anything? Just no. Thank you. Right, moving on to officers' reports, for plan resolution, that's on page 11. Any issues on it?
Yeah, just a quick update since that paper was produced. Just wanted to say that 24.1 regarding green spaces improvements, the Southdown Pond Sleeper Bridge has now been replaced with a new one. Regarding Harpenden Common surface improvements, the only thing now holding that up is the weather and the soil conditions. So we are waiting until it dries out further because we will get a better surface put down if we have drier conditions. And the Batford Springs Management Plan Year 1 works started this week. So that's the latest update on this.
I'll make a quick point. I think I've read it before. For the officers that these pages sort of from 14 onwards are intended to be landscape, but they're printed off this way. And the result is the print is very small. It's just taking that. You can changing on software and VCA.
So next one, budget sample 2, page 21, budgetary control. Is there anything you want to highlight here?
So, Chair, yes, thank you. The main thing with this is that we're showing a favourable position by £42,000, and we expect that the year-end position will be at least as favourable as that, if not better. And the only other thing to note in the report is the information that we didn't have previously, that's now in there, is information about the car park revenue up until the 31st of December.
Any comments on
Thank you, Chair. Just note on the investment for Ramwood Lane and Wood End, presuming that investment doesn't happen until we have ownership, do we know that will be this financial year or will be into the next budget?
So, Chair, the practical answer to that is that we are now expecting ownership of the play areas by the 31st of March. We've done some significant chasing in the last few weeks that has led yesterday to the district council expecting the amendments that we've made to the transfer documents, incidentally, which are all in line with the Rockhampton Park transfer. One of the reasons that there's been a bit of a slowdown is that the template documents they used were using wording clauses from previous transfers at Ports Hill, back to Springs. But of course, we've had a more recent one, which we went through lengthy negotiations and discussions. So we've got reassurance now that that will happen by the end of March. What that means is we can deliver our development timetable, which is that we're due on site 4th of April. To answer your finance question, because the work starts on the 4th of April, we'll be paid out the next financial year.
any other points? Anyone wants to raise on this one? And so we're just noting that. Right, 7.3, draft for Hampstead Park.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I think this falls to me for this one. So as part of the commitment to taking and acquiring Rockhampton Park, there's been an extensive piece of work to develop its first management plan. It's been led by a subcommittee of which councillors here were form that subcommittee. We've had some community engagement, which is developing ideas that you see in front of you. And so you're asked this evening to comment on and approve the management plan in order for us to start delivering. What you will see in the management plan itself, there is a number of key points on page 30, which really shows that the town council hasn't been waiting to agree a management plan before it starts doing stuff. And it would be amiss of me not to just plug the sorts of things that the council has done already since its take ownership, which I would suggest is a significant amount in such a short space of time. So welcome the comments, questions about this, and the aim is to seek your approval so it becomes a live document.
That's the supplement which produced the plan. I acknowledge that actually most of the content is down to Carl and his colleagues, for which thanks. Put a lot of thought into how we the council should look after the park over the coming 3 years. And the process of finalising the plan, actually, I think it was time well spent by all of us on the committee, because there must be like the Carl that contributed some comments and some ideas. And I really thought it was a very worthwhile process. And thank you to Carl and his team.
Anybody have any comments on this one?
I think it looks amazing. Like the photos and everything, it's really good. It's a well-read document, and it's amazing what's already been achieved. I just have a question: is this the part of it? The footpath thing? All right, this is the path that's actually a park, like on the hill, is it, towards the playgrounds here?
Yeah.
And then this is not really a footpath, though, is it?
Yeah, so that particular map depicts the some of the rights of way that are adjacent to it. So,
Okay, we're not planning, or are we, to make that into a footpath that you don't slide on, like, that's not too money.
so there are no kind of live plans now to turn that into footpath, although you note in there is an initiative to review our accessibility, which doesn't include the parts that are in the park, but that is primarily to do with making sure that the existing parks that we've got are, fit for purpose for the right sort of material.
But that really include this.
No, that wouldn't include that. That's just showing one of the rights of way.
Oh, right of way. So
really,
yeah,
yeah,
it's not
so
the same as a footpath.
That's not saying a footpath. What will happen, it's worth saying, Chair, that the initiatives are set out in here. As usual, we will bring individual reports to committee at various points to consider detailed options for things, including the pathway that's been made, including things like skate parks and any other development. There will be further reports that this group considers.
Just on that, page 44, which was attracted some attention. The footpaths do have official numbers, not the town council, and the document does refer to those numbers. That's why I've included the map on page 44 to show what numbers we're talking about when we refer to the footpath. And the town council confirmed, I think number 11, which is Coach Lane, isn't actually something we're responsible for. That's to be public right.
Yeah, that's correct, Chair. We're not responsible for any rights of way. Effectively, the maintenance comes down to the rights of way and parts or county council. We work really closely with them, usually to try to get some of their funding.
Chair, on page 33, 3.2, there's reference there to exploring options for redirecting flowing flood surface water, including the Dell area. I just wondered with the recent flood management committee meeting, etc., and the costs involved with that work, is that something that we should sort of explicitly be mentioning here, or should we make it a bit more vague in case the works are deemed to be too expensive? Trying to do something with the Dell.
Right, first, and I think what Rob Radcliffe was saying, we'll look at it. We're not committed to a particular amount of money we'll spend. This is already in the topic today. So not thinking strongly whether the factors in around it personally.
Yes, I mean, actually, we are exploring options that doesn't include the Dell area. I think we haven't reached or I should say the task initially we haven't reached a conclusion yet as to what recommendations it may make to council. That may mean down the line that we've got reference to the Dell area and we don't do anything, but and it could mean the opposite. So I think for now it's factually correct. So it's okay to include it in. I think it doesn't commit the council. It's good for action.
Maybe we could delete the words including in the Dell area.
You could if you wish to, yeah. I mean, the exploring the options is the factual bit. We are exploring the Dell area. If you happen to remove it, I would always prefer not to be specific when you're exploring something. So if you have to remove it, I think that'd be a good idea. If it was in, of course, didn't problems, but if you have to remove it, that's as well. Right?
So that's just not right. That's including the Dell area.
So that's on page 33.
Sorry, unrelated, but just with my youth engagement working party hat on, just to put on record our thanks to the officers for the good work that they've done in the consultation and following the new youth engagement policy. We had a meeting earlier and there was some good stuff that came out of that, so I just wanted to get that on the public record.
Yes, very quickly say, a lot of this American plans also based on the survey that we had. It's because there was, if you look at what we've done or proposed, and a lot of it was what reflects that survey, and there was concerns of safety, and the CCTV now and the 3G pitch were requested, and that's going to come in. And then the skate park was added because it wasn't in the original plan we had, and then after sort of looking at the survey and what we thought we could do, that was added. So I think it kind of shows that it's like the front offices for sort of, I think they responded well to what the community said. I think that's the better one than what was the first draft. So I think the process went well.
That's a very good point to try and admit it. Thank you very much. Absolutely right.
Any other points? Okay, then the recommendation to page 24. We are asked to approve the 20 comments on amendments. There's only one draft plan attached to the appendix. Okay. Bylaws.
Yes, please, Chair. Quite simply, these are the draft bylaws which are suggested for HTC green spaces. HTC has learned from its recent experience of attempting to review the bylaws that adjusting the model bylaws is likely to lead to the Secretary of State's Department not approving them. I think that some of the context behind that is that the Secretary of State's Department has had lawyers working on these model bylaws for an awful long time to produce them and finalise them. So if the bylaws that we submit don't match up to those, then they're very unlikely to approve them. So the outcome is that the committee here are requested to approve the use of these bylaws based on the model bylaws for use in the process to get them ultimately approved. That process will begin once the 4 new green spaces are in Poplar Town Council's land name. In addition to what I've just said there, I know that the town clerk would like to say something about bylaws as well.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I just wanted to clarify something on bylaws that it was a question that came up perhaps the last time we looked at this, and that was to do with the existing bylaws, in particular where those bylaws relate to land that we did used to own but we now own, and whether those bylaws were essentially in place. Now, bylaws you kind of would have learned just from what Phil said there are a real complex thing to try to put in place. But essentially, once you have a bylaw in place, it remains in place unless it's formally revoked. The process for formally revoking it is probably equally as painful as the process for trying to get new ones in place. So if we take the bylaws that are in place for assets that we didn't used to own but now do own, so for example, Rockhampton Park. So there are bylaws in place relating to Rockhampton Park. So they are in force, even though it's the previous landowner that put them in place. There is a big however, and the big however is actually how you can enforce them. And there are potentially two big issues with that. First of all, some of the model bylaws that are in place have been in place for some time. And so quite possibly the language in the new modern bylaws don't match the model bylaws at the point at which they were adopted. And there could possibly be some changes in legislation that would mean some of the old bylaws are no longer enforceable because things have moved on. So that could be the case, in particular in relation to where we've taken them on from the district council who haven't looked at bylaws for some time. So that's the one kind of however. The other, however, is again in relation to enforcement, and that is if you take the Rockhampton Park example, the bylaws in there refer to the council in lots of places. So the council has the discretion to allow events. The council has the discretion to allow structures. The definition of the council within the bylaws is St Albans City and District Council. So that does potentially limit the ability for the town council to enforce them. It does mean that we have the potential to work with district council in order to enforce ones in the interim period that we don't have our own in place. But that is another limitation. It would be useful if it said something like, the council is the district council or any future public body that take ownership of the sites or something like that. That would be quite useful. So there are two, however. So the bylaws are still in place. They can only be revoked through a certain process, but there are some challenges on sites that we now own where we weren't the organisation that applied for the bylaws.
Okay, but if we put these in place, that will supersede the previous.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. Do you have a point?
No, just thank you. Great, that's good.
But just want to go very briefly. Two things. I have given Carl a few sort of minor draft points, which but he may or may not wish to include, and that we don't need to make them. But my question is, in your experience, how often are these sort of bylaws actually enforced? And if they're not, is there a reason for that? Like, you could have the park, or they don't live in the park, but actually it's such a pain to enforce these, and often it's been turning up or find something else like the Drugs Act, and that's what we're pursuing.
Yeah. So it's a really good question, and the approach that, and it's a question that the committee and council have asked previously, the approach that we've got here to enforcing bylaws is a reactive one. That's quite deliberate. So what we don't do, partly because we don't have resources, is go around our parks and identify where people are breaching the bylaws. We use the bylaws as a kind of a last resort, essentially. So, and we will enforce them or use them to take action where we deem it appropriate. So, really good examples, two really good examples. The biggest one is unauthorised encampments. So we have moved on to unauthorised encampments without the use of bailiffs by using the bylaws, where the police have cooperated with us and enabled us to and helped us to do that. So we were able to say to the police, these are bylaws in place. We want your support in moving this unauthorised encampment straight away. That's one reactive example. Another one is a smaller one, but is around fires. So occasionally we might have people that have set up a small camping stove or fire or something. And again, we've used the bylaws with them directly to advise them that they can't do it and move them along. But it's worth probably saying that there are kind of probably two levels to enforcement. So the first level is the kind of level I've described there, where we say there's a bylaw, you can't do that, and then hopefully work with the police to move someone on, or they move on themselves. There is a second level to bylaws, which we spoke about when we first put this round to committee, which seems like a long time ago now. And that is the council, once we get these bylaws in place, should consider whether it wants to take on enforcement powers. So it has the ability to identify trained staff who can go out and issue fines. At the moment, we don't issue any fines at all because we haven't kind of enabled that enforcement powers, but we could do that. So that's something that we should consider down the line. Again, I think only from a reactive point of view, but it could be another tool for the council in dealing with issues when they do come up.
Thank you, Chair. One potentially slightly pedantic point. On page 61, given that we now own that one so far, it is not being included in the black bullet text or in the red bullet text.
Yeah, Chair. So I think there are a couple of points in this document where we're kind of in a bit of a transition period. So another point similar to that is the maps. So there are maps that we could have included in this stage, but it's a bit up in the air. We weren't quite sure whether we would have the open spaces in time in order to include it in this process. But given that if the committee approves these this evening, we would include those new open spaces that we're due to get as well. So there are a few anomalies in there that need tidying up, but that's mainly because there are we're just in this weird period or something.
I was aware I was being pedantic. I just thought I'd raise it in case no one else did.
Yeah, Chair, just if I could respond to another point. So Councillor Butterworth, very usefully sent me through some small amendments. And just to feedback, my feedback to Councillor Butterworth is that I agreed with all of them. However, the experience is even the most logical changes in languages, even sometimes adding and or changing a word to a different one, does not bode well for how they're received. It is probably one of the most territorial exercises that I've witnessed in trying to get pilots. So completely agree with the points made, but we would have to be able to make a real strong justified argument as to what, even if we change it in word,
And that might not succeed. So what's the point?
and you only find out at the end of the process when they tell you no, you can't do it, and then you have to start the process again. It's very frustrating. And that includes things like the titles, where it refers to pleasure grounds, public walks and open spaces. That is what the model bylaws are called, so you have to match up with them. It doesn't make much sense.
Page 55, under the children's play areas. So it says no person aged 15 years or over, some into or remaining. I'm fairly certain that play area, the age on the older section is 11 to 15 years of age. Might be wrong, but I'm fairly sure that's the case.
No,
Say again?
you mean 15 minimum?
No, 11 to 15 years old in the oldest. So it obviously says here 15 years of age or over. So I just don't know if that conflicts with actually the age group that we are allowing into that play area.
So, Chair, I would go back to the kind of the reactive and the discretionary point in that. So just because something in here that says, in this case, someone over 15 can't go on it, doesn't mean that we're going to go and challenge that. What it doesn't enable us to do is if there is a group of 17-year-olds in there doing things they shouldn't do, having a bylaw in relation to that gives us a lever to challenge that behaviour. There are some councils who have rangers that go around every day with these sorts of things and go, how old are you? There was lots of cases like that. So because we don't use it in that way, if we were using it in that way, I think you're completely right, you might want to change that. But it's a tool for us to use, should we need to. So for that reason, I would advise.
And I would assume that the 15 is the standard bylaws that you've referred to in the Secretary of State.
I'd have to double check that actually, but I would assume so, yeah, I would assume so. And there is, again, there is probably not a great deal of logic as to why that model bylaw is 15 either. So
We're better off with the bylaws
Yes.
without.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if that was another week inserted or if we could put in 16 or if that was just the standard.
Well, age 2023, no person shall without reasonable excuse bathe or swim in any water. We know that they will do that at Bradford Springs.
Yeah.
On admission.
But the danger of criminalising all these exact 15-year-olds and the American day, I know they do. potentially everyone's getting up criminal records, some counters us having crappy bylaws. Because the government won't accept anything else.
It might just be caution.
I think we trust our officers very much.
We had to probably pass a resolution of the town council, which will affect our own lives.
Yeah, Chair, on that, just because that's another example in terms of the waterways, but there have been examples where people using the waterways, which yourself we don't have an issue with really, have been carrying out kind of, I guess, like secondary behaviours that aren't acceptable. So Backward Springs is a great example of some of the issues that go on down there in summertime from users, has enabled us to use this bylaw with the police to move people on. So again, it's a tool. These are all kind of tools for us. But
Recommendation 2. Committee is asked to note the draft document Appendix A. The link had arrived at, which was done to approve and for use during the formal consultation. So we're okay. Thank you. Which one? 7.5, which we've done. We've got the 2 stuff. This one's paid. So this has been platform lights supplement.
Thank you, Chair. Very, very simple. That lights up. Has normally been on a Sunday afternoon, late evening. Attendance over recent years has been quite low. It tracks about 50 people. When you compare that to the big attendance and popularity of Southdown, which happens on a weekday, and the school manages to get involved, the request is that we change the Batford lights up from a Sunday to a Thursday to see if it improves its popularity.
Sounds good to me. No comments. Well, recommendations 2.1, page 89. We will attend them. Right, 7.7, page 91. And the events come under 2023. We're going to take out sustainability markets.
Yes, Chair.
Well,
I was going to say this is going to need some amendment, I think, after tonight's discussions. It is for requesting for the committee to note it, but now noting it subject to the fact that certain things are going to change in it.
Issues on this one, what's the right? Let's just note it, shall we, and then amend it. Okay. 8. Plus 3 memorial.
So, Chair, a request for a memorial bench to go on Harpenden Common. It's for someone who's called Nikki Lake. It's supported by the Green Spaces Development Officer, who has done their own assessment and criteria. As it says, the person's lived all of their life in Harpenden, apart from when they went to university, worked for 17 years as a physiotherapist, and spent quite a lot of time enjoying the common. I have noted in there that there is actually a score in there by the officer, which is quite a high score. We're not supposed to do that anymore, and that's probably the last time that you'll see that, because we'll make sure that we don't include that in the future.
Okay, that's on the open news. Okay, so can we approve that request? So 9, page 101, and specification from the works of Backward Springs local. A few of us went down there and had a look. Yep. What was proposed sound to reasonable, reflected. Waterways down there. So, did you have any comments on this? That's just written.
Just a comment, and I'm not really sure if it's relevant at all, but given the issues that they have with erosion, etc., with the river rising and falling, etc., is there any kind of guarantee on lifespan of any of the works that are carried out? I didn't notice any sort of reference to that in the tender, whether they obviously guarantee their works for a specific period of time. That's just something I noted. And then there was also just a sentence on page 107, the paragraph starting careful consideration. There's a full stop missing after the first sentence. Final point. And then the sentence I didn't understand was the weight limits of the bridges on the reserve are not known, and so any crossing routes may not be permitted. Really no.
So, Chair, I know that that's been included simply because it basically highlights to the contractor that if they go down there to do a recce and assess how they do the works, to highlight to them that they might not be able to take vehicles across the bridges, that we might have to find other ways of doing things or other ways of accessing the location.
Yes, then 2.1, page 101, committees has to approve attendance application for all improvements. So we point to 10, for the exempt business. Two surveys.
So, Chair, thank you. The managing our food stock safely is one of the big tasks for Hartlepool Town Council. It is a big task because there are lots of trees, and in years to come there will be even more trees that will need surveying and looking after. We went out and got some quotes for the trees that were due to be surveyed in 22-23. And this resulted in quotes with a large variation in prices. The lowest quote was from a company who use a different IT program called the Health and Safety Information. And probably the Town Council's current IT program no longer fits our purpose. We think we can do it in a more efficient way through using a different system. Our Green Spaces development officers have seen a demonstration of the alternative IT program that's mentioned in here, and they are confident that it meets theirs and Hartlepool Town Council's requirements. The company provided the lowest quote for the 22-23 tree surveys has also provided a quote to survey all of Hartlepool Town Council's trees in 22-23, and this quote is very competitive or lower than the other quotes that were given for just 22-23 surveys. So we're asking the committee to consider approving the surveying of all Hartlepool Town Council surveyable trees in 22-23 by the contractor TMA, which is the lowest quote, and approve that Hartlepool Town Council move to the new IT system, which is MyTrees, to manage the safety maintenance of our tree stock.
Thank you, Chair. Just if we have them all surveyed this year, when do they all next need to be surveyed? Is this an annual thing?
So, Chair, the surveys are carried out in accordance with the Hartlepool Town Council tree policy, which this committee re-approved a couple of meetings back. And that means that
This isn't 3.13 of the fire commission.
yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of things. Just if we take on this new IT system, does that tie us into using the same company going forward? Why can they basically just give us any quote they like in 3 to 5 years, and the surveys are due again? And then also when it's recognised that works need to be done, on a survey? Is there like a predetermined period of time that the works need to be done within? Because obviously that's going to have massive implications in terms of budget and how much is going to have to be spent within a period of time after the survey results come back. So yeah, is that achievable, like financially? Are we going to have contractors available to do the work? And the other point is, if you have, like again, I think I've read recently that when you fell trees or if there's works done, you're now leaving the felled tree in position where it's felled. Is that correct? And then would that be the case with all of the, I wouldn't call it waste, but all the trees that are removed? Basically, what do you do if you've got an enormous amount of waste after you've had to do all these works in one short burst?
So thank you for the questions, Chair. The answers are, the answer to the first one is, I have asked that question about whether we are locked in to their system by, to them doing the surveys if we go with that system. And apparently that system is compatible with other surveys done by other companies. The second thing about scheduling of the works, the way that is done is, and it's the way that we did in previous years, is that the works are prioritised under health and safety. So we end up with works that are going to have to be done within the first year. So this year we're surveying. The first year of works will be completed following that, and that'll be the highest priority in terms of safety. And we probably have a 3-year plan to complete, depending on what priority is. And the third thing about leaving wood in sight, on site, this happens quite a lot now, and it happens mainly because it's good for biodiversity. So, I mean, one example that I can think of is up at Batford Springs near the play area. There was the standing deadwood, which we had to have felled last year because it was assessed as being danger of falling and a risk. But we've left it in the same place. It's rotting away, and goodness knows how many species are actually living in there. So both of our green spaces officers are very knowledgeable when it comes to ecology, biodiversity, biology, trees and things, and they will advise as to whether or not the debris can be left in place, or whether or not we have to move it somewhere else where we could create biodiversity log piles in a different site, or whether for some reason it has to be removed completely.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at the quotes in 3.4, this is just 3.4. Which the contract C is less than half B and less than a third of A. And I read that actually, if C survey all the trees, and therefore get the benefit of the new software or trees in the new software program, then it simply takes us up to about contract B, and therefore that's very tempting. It's a very good deal. But when you have quotes, and going back to 3.4, that's so divergent, is there anything we need to be suspicious about? Any question you need to ask? Is there anything to see in terms of quality work and how they can do it so much more cheaper?
Chair, the reassurance that I take on this is that I've learned that the company that we're recommending to do it is used by a very close local authority who hold them in high regard. I don't know if that answers your question, gives you reassurance, but we do know that they provide a good service to a nearby local authority.
So just to add on that, this is, and I haven't done the analysis for that actually, but very rarely do we bring a recommendation where the cheapest option is the preferred one. And this is fairly unique in that. But as part of our due diligence, as Phil mentioned, we do look at previous experience, in particular where they're working in a local authority setting. And so that kind of background check goes alongside this to give us confidence I think as we found with lots of different initiatives and works in the last, well, since I've been here, at times there is such a disparity between different quotes, it's often hard to explain. So,
Contractor may not want business.
yeah.
So just
So,
overpriced them.
so I do also think with this particular opportunity for the contractors, we are a good opportunity because we do have a large tree stock. We're very proactive in the way we manage our tree stock, which is a good thing, but also a tricky thing because by carrying out the surveys like we do identify issues that we have to then sort out. So I do also think that we are a good partner for organisations to work with. They do a lot of work locally as well, which might also have a positive impact on it.
Thank you. The speculative is which we have a local and loss leader because the future one. Fine. But have we checked on their indemnity insurance position? Just to confirm?
Surely this was done all the due diligence.
Yes, Chair. So there are various things that we would require them to submit to us, including insurance and other.
Okay. I won't read that. Can we go to the recommendation? 2.1 on page 119, take them both together if that's okay. One favor? I think that's it. Have to move into consent business for a few minutes. So, I'll read this out.
So, Chair, I mean, I can just give you the recommendation, which is essentially to move into exempt business and always consider the item talked about earlier on the farmers market location, because there are some points and legal advice that might come down the line that might wish the council to lead into exempt business.
We'll look down that. Moving into exempt business. Thank you. Good job.